Most animated shows you grew up on had that episode. You know, the one that had a much more chilling and frightening premise than usual, and went further with it than the others. It stuck with you, didn't it? Whenever you bring that show up in conversation, that episode is likely going to worm its way in. But there was a show that was pretty much loaded with that episode. It never stopped being spooky and thrilling. It frightened a generation, but found a snug place in their hearts. It was called Courage the Cowardly Dog. Courage was a show that I hardly ever got to experience as a kid. I saw the groovies and bumpers all the time. I just never felt like watching. I later got a better understanding of it through word of mouth and YouTube poops.
And the only thing uglier than this is this!
I missed out on some trauma, it seems, so I'm happy I watched through it for the first time as an adult, when I had a thicker skin and could better appreciate the artistry that went into it. This show has a longer legacy than other Cartoon Network shows of its time, getting not one, but two completely different revivals. But I'm sticking with the original run for the sake of this review. This series was created by John R. Dilworth, a guy who, fittingly enough, looks like he's going to yell boo at you in every photo you find of him. A surrealist animator from New York, heavily influenced by Salvador Dali, he founded Stretch Films in 1991. While a well-liked studio with a cult following, it's found itself in many developmental dead ends. They had a hand in developing Schnitz and Fondue with Jumbo Pictures, which became a segment on Kablam that never really went anywhere, and they later created Hector the Get Over Cat and Garlic Boy specifically for Nickelodeon's later showcases, neither of them getting any more episodes. They had more luck over at Cartoon Network though. They and Hanna-Barbera sponsored their 1996 short film The Chicken from Outer Space, inspired by Wallace and Gromit's The Wrong Trousers, which premiered at the Asifa East Animation Festival in January before being shown on the What a Cartoon Show. It even got nominated for an Academy Award, so it proved fairly popular. This was it, their big break. But it wouldn't be until 1998 that Cartoon Network would approach them to turn it into a full series. The animation would be polished and everyone would be fully voiced, but the vibe of the short would remain intact. Courage the Cowardly Dog premiered on August 21st, 1999, and ran for 4 seasons, ending on November 22nd, 2002. It proved very popular across its run, and for some time after, and managed to snag an Annie Award for its very first episode. 4 seasons with 13 episodes apiece was an odd length for a cartoon. They were usually either super short or a fair bit longer. It's a respectable length all the same, and you've probably heard the saying in the business to leave your audience wanting more. Stretch Films got to make a CGI short, The Fog of Courage, in 2014, but since then revival prospects have been more muddy. John Dilworth spent a few years developing a prequel series with Boomerang, only for it to get shelved. And given he had no involvement in the recent Scooby-Doo crossover, straight out of nowhere, it doesn't seem like it'll ever be in his hands again. Still, there has to be a reason people have wanted to bring it back so often, right?
Things I do for love. Hey Shadow! Are you down there?
Most of the show is set in a cottage in the middle of nowhere, Kansas to be exact. An old couple called the Bags lives there, along with a purple dog named Courage that Muriel found abandoned in the city. The trio intend to live a peaceful, quiet life, but are constantly invaded by aliens, monsters, and spirits that only Courage can defeat. Unwillingly, of course. It's a classic horror location, literally the most isolated plane of Western society you can think of. With how old the Bags are and how Courage is a dog, they're relatively defenseless in these invasions too, but that doesn't mean they're bad characters by any stretch. Courage is obviously very shy and fearful of the world around him, all he wants in life being safety and the love of his owner Muriel. He's equally prone to agitation and sadness when a situation gets too dire, but he's still a great, capable protagonist who saves the day very often. I don't think someone this loyal can ever deserve to be called a coward, that's my 2 cents. Muriel is a sweet old Scottish lady who lives a very simple life and tends to be oblivious to some of the dangers. I can't really hold any of this against her, and her positive traits, like being one of the only people who's actually kind to Courage, balance out and make her a useful presence. Eustace is her cruel, grouchy, and greedy husband who loves to torment Courage with newspaper wax and scares. He's the quintessential anti-hero, technically aligning good, and just as much a victim to the horror as the others, but his cruelty and greed will often get the best of him. You're quickly able to understand why he's like this when you spend time with his family, who are an equally cold, unsupportive bunch.
Ready for your surprise?
Courage's computer is the closest thing he has to a recurring friend, and even it's more interested in teasing him than giving him useful information. It's hilarious all the same, unironically my favorite character. It's always great seeing it. There's a Romanian chihuahua called Shirley, a mystic medium who often gets tangled up in Courage's misadventures. She's also a fun character who delivers some interesting plots, but I feel she could have been developed a lot deeper. Dr. Vindaloo is an eccentric Indian doctor who's usually of very little help. He's just a comedic checkup character to give some exposition or a funny bit. Not the best, not the worst. A recurring enemy is Dai Lung, a gifted Chinese inventor who spends plenty of time building weird contraptions in nowhere. This representation can feel whiter than Vanilla Ice sometimes, but it's cool to see they have Eastern Europe, South Asia, and East Asia covered. Another villain is Le Quack, a French duck who loves hatching evil schemes, who's also a delightfully evil presence, despite being a duck. But Courage's main adversary is Cats, his polar opposite. Conserved, conniving, and feline, and all his businesses prohibit dogs. He's one of the best villains in the show, and there's quite an unforgettable rogues gallery.
Oh no, it's dark in here.
Season 1s are usually the slowest and most developmental for any show, especially animated, but that manages to apply very well in Courage's favour. Clear adjustments had been made to the characters and their designs since The Chicken from Outer Space, but the tone has remained similarly dark and mysterious. Not all the Nowhere newcomers are baddies, but they're each menacing in their own way. One of the big differences between Season 1 and the latter three is the dialogue. Namely, Courage speaks more frequently, usually offering quips or thoughts that are easily telegraphed through his actions.
It's Muriel. She's in trouble.
You're showing me far better than you're telling me. Well, this is something you'll miss, as he speaks far less frequently in Season 2 and is almost mute in 3 and 4. He doesn't really have anyone to bounce off. Muriel and Eustace can't seem to hear him, and few of the other characters have meaningful conversations with him. What is meaningful is the art and animation. Being an early example of an entirely digitally animated show, they went about the design traditionally and the presentation with a new age approach. The animation is very nice, detailed, and smooth for a primarily American-based production. Whether or not you dig their uncanny and often gothic visual identity, the fact it wasn't outsourced is worthy of attention. This is entirely the look the production team wanted. While some of the digitally composited textures can look a bit dated, there's a reason no other show has done this on a regular basis since. The color choices are always smart. There's way more colors that you can use for horror than red. My favorite thing they got right with the animation was the location shots for Nowhere. It always looks utterly desolate, no matter if it's a tedious day, searing afternoon, or creepy night. That's the point they were making, and it's a bloody good one. I wouldn't say Season 2 is quite as edgy as 1, but it still has some scares, and they're usually bigger, albeit less common. Season 2 decided to appeal more to emotion, make the characters sweeter, even some of the villains. It's probably a side effect of the cast growing on the creative team and getting happier endings in the process, but I also wouldn't put it past Cartoon Network wanting the show to be more lighthearted. The fear factor comes less from the violent and disturbing scenarios, but from a more unfamiliar feeling. Season 2 dabbled more in surreal horror. This definitely fit the nature of animation better, but I still care for that darker, more traditional horror feel the first season dished out. Still, another really creative season that never stops trying. Season 3 is another good showing, but unlike most other shows I've covered, I wouldn't call it my favourite or very close to the top. It's my 4th favourite season, if that's a compliment. The season was dragged down for me by the departure of Lionel Wilson as the voice of Eustace, so they replaced him with Arthur Anderson, and boy can you tell. Not because he sounds all too different, he can still make the character work, but because they still use some clips and sound bites from Wilson's time. He's still better than Wallace Shawn, but I digress. I guess some of my feelings toward the season come down to me not finding this run of stories as strong or interesting. A lot of it is still really dark and gothic, but they were starting to substitute surreal, uneasy weird for general cartoon weird, which doesn't have the same sort of bite. There are some things I like, including the 3D scene in Hard Drive Courage, a product of its time but still really cool. And I noticed there was a ton of traveling this season. It's almost Courage the Cowardly Dog World Tour. There is some good episodes and concepts, so I'd still say season 3 is worth your time.
You're not perfect.
You can't beat season 4. If you try, it'll beat you. They struck an excellent balance for this season, taking little bits and bobs from everything that came before. It's got the darkness of season 1 in full force, it's easily the darkest season of the series, but it's also got the heart of season 2, it's also the sweetest. I guess what it takes from 3 is the continued world tour feeling. They're still expanding their horizons all the way through to the end. After a minor slump in 3, I'm really happy that 4 was as great as it was. It was the ideal place to end things. Do I wish there was a season 5? Not really, I'd had my fill. When they've reached the point where the villains are trying to drown Courage in a toilet and Eustace has become one of his arch enemies, it's safe to cap it off here while you can still deliver those surprises. It is disappointing that Courage was cancelled here for money. Cartoon Network simply couldn't turn him into a marketable plushie. But this 52 episode run had some real classics to its name. Freaky Fred is a jack of all trades. It's got an uneasy villain in the form of a relative of Muriel's who seems a bit off, a memorable narrative hook of partly being told through a poem in Fred's head, and a terrific sense of drama as the tensity crescendos into Fred outright trying to hurt Courage. How naughty. The Quilt Club is a wondrous examination of friendship and what it should mean to be part of a unit. Certainly not what Muriel goes through. It's grim, but it's the most active she ever was in a plot, if that's anything to go by. The Duck Brothers is my favourite of the running theme of bird invasions. How can you go wrong with Ringo Starr ducks? It's fairly silly, but you kind of need to expect that going in. The Mask is notorious for going a lot harder than the others. The violence is especially brutal, and the end of the story has a heavy domestic abuse situation, which has led some to thinking the episode has lesbian undertones. No matter how dire this story is, I applaud Courage for keeping me on the edge of my seat, and showing its most messed up tale is a part of real life. On a lighter note, So in Louvre Are We Too is a beautiful tribute to the Louvre. You truly don't appreciate how much iconic art they possess until they come to life on a full moon and cause mayhem for Courage and the Bags. It's a miracle they got permission to poke fun at all these famous paintings and sculptures too. King Ramses' curse has to be on here. I'm an enthusiast of Egyptian history, and King Ramses is one of the most memorable villains of the series. His voice, his animation, the plagues he brings upon the cottage are all iconic, and the ways he messes with Eustace are clever and satisfying. 2 thumbs up all around. Robot Randy didn't deserve to be as heartwarming as it was. This member of a ruthless mechanical race is forced to enslave Nowhere when he really just wants to carve reindeer out of wood. Randy is a legitimately sympathetic villain, but come on, this is a very offbeat story that you can enjoy in many ways. As a spoof of the young soldier who doesn't want to instigate war, and as a spoof of robot alien menaces. The Tower of Dr. Jalost was their only other crack at a half-hour episode besides The Mask, and it earned that extra runtime. The villain of the piece isn't Dr. Jalost, it's depression. And the hero of the story isn't courage, it's not even happiness, it's Prozac. This is the sort of story that you'll be able to tell gets more interesting with age. The finale is perfect. Not literally, nothing can be, and that's what this is about. Courage's final adversary is his most personal, anxiety. I think it was important that a show that everyone knew would be best known for its dark and frightening moments ended with a very positive message about self-image and what it means to have courage. But my favorite episode is the one right before it, Remembrance of Courage Past. Courage has PTSD, that's the story. His parents were kidnapped by a mad scientist and sent into space, so can you blame him? Amidst all the fears and scares this show delivered, you'll need a way to let your emotions out, and this episode is sad and heartbreaking enough to get you there. This show can be really strong entertainment, but here are some of its weaker outings. The Clutching Foot is the one where Eustace gets turned into a big purple foot, with each of the toes being a mafia gangster. This is weird, creepy, and gross, and Courage is justified in needing to follow their orders, but I felt it lead too far into the gross out, and the villain lacked dimension and threat. With Squatting Tiger, Hidden Dog, I appreciate them doing a story set in China, where Dai Lung's at home, but making the country's culture the focal point and showing how creepy it is felt a bit off. I doubt the staff had poor intentions, but there's actual scary stuff to point out with China. Courage under the volcano also isn't a flattering depiction of the Pacific. The volcano's sacrifice isn't something we've done in earnest in a long time. To a certain extent, 1,000 Years of Courage is about a world run by bananas in the distant future. You can see why this one didn't sit well with me, right? The concept's silly just to make a very thin satire, and while the future is scary for a lot of people, this episode doesn't do anything to tap into that. Watch the Birdies takes the cake for the most annoying episode. The real horror comes from how much irritation these baby vultures are gonna put you through. I can't expect a peachy experience all the time, especially in a horror show, but man, they could have made this easier on the senses. I have my gripes with these bottom episodes, but the good ones far outweigh them. Courage the Cowardly Dog is classic Cartoon Network in a way that didn't feel like another check off my box. This was them at their most willing to lend animators, who had fought tooth and nail to make waves in the industry for a decade, a home for all their wildest ideas. The entertainment industry is much more structured today than it was in the early 2000s. You have to be successful to be popular, and vice versa. Stretch Films made Courage, but they've never been a household name, so it was great of Cartoon Network to give them a chance to make a one-of-a-kind show for their growing lineup. When you think about the biggest names of Cartoon Network, of the past and now, you'll usually think of the Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Ben 10 and Steven Universe, among many others that crossed a certain threshold of public recognition. But amongst viewers of a certain age, this timid dog and the things he did for love will remain some of their most treasured memories of the network. With all of this said, what's up with that little grunt at the end of the title sequence? I'm sure it's cut off in certain prints, so few fans could really know about it or care about it. Post your fan theories about what it is and who makes it. Is it Dilly? It's Dilly. Goodbye for now.
We'll be right back with Disney's House of Mouse here on Disney Channel.
What?
Return the slide.
Get the f off my property!